Hey, StudMuffin 1986 here, doing another video, and my previous one was on, and especially for players that had a win rate of 30% to 40%. And this time I'm going to be doing a video for players that have a 40% to 50%. It's going to be a little bit more technical. I think it's really going to help out. I know these are some things that if you definitely fit within this range, it will most likely help you. I'm making this video because I really want to be able to help. I think there's a lot of people that fall within this category, and there's going to be some tips that I'm going to go over that I think that'll really help players out within this range. So I would say the very first thing that I've noticed with a lot of 40 to 50% range players is that they're not using the correct tank type correctly. Either they're trying to snipe with a heavy tank, they're playing with a light or medium tank, almost more like a heavy tank. And it just, when you play with a tank type incorrectly, you can end up putting yourself in so many positions incorrectly and getting yourself killed so fast and not being very effective or very useful for that matter for your team. So there's 4 different tank types currently in Blitz. There's light tanks, there with the diamond, the whole diamond. Then you have a medium tank, which has the icon of a diamond, but it's like cutting, it almost looks like it's cut in two. And then you have a heavy tank, which is a diamond, but it looks like it's cut into three parts. And then you have a tank destroyer, which is identified with an upside down triangle. So that is how you can know off the bat what type of tank you're going to be playing with. And so I'm going to go into just a little bit of details on how to play with these different tanks to help you out. So with a light tank, most likely you have the least amount of armor. You need to be making sure at all times that you're never the center of attention when it comes to an enemy's focal point for pointing their cannon at you. If you are, you need to change locations. You need to make sure that you're in a place where you can get cover. But most importantly, to fulfill your role at the very beginning of the game, you need to help your team get eyes on where the enemy is. And by doing so, there are specific locations on the map you can get to centrally, most likely, where you can get to very quickly before many other tanks and other tank types can even reach, because light tanks are typically the fastest. You can get there and you can end up spotting the bad guys for you. And when you do that, that's going to help your team know, okay, where the enemy is going. That'll help them know how to position themselves quicker than the enemies, and it's going to give your team much more of a better advantage. Once you spot, sometimes it's even better to not take the first shot you see when you see a bad guy. Sometimes it may even be more beneficial to sit and wait and see how many bad guys or just you can spot. And then when doing so, using your speed and maneuverability to keep cover, to flank, to keep those eyes on the enemy, and so forth. And we'll get into more depth and detail in other videos. The second type, medium tanks, are played very similar to light tanks. They typically have a little bit more armor than light tanks do, and they're typically not as fast as light tanks, but they're still very, very useful when it comes to spotting. So you still want to spot for your team. And with some, depending on armor, you can get and you can rely on your armor somewhat, but it's more of we'll get more into the technical aspects, but just by understanding how to play with these different tank types will dramatically help you increase your win rate. Third, heavy tank, you're going to want to be on the front lines. You need to understand side scraping, and you need to be applying pressure on the enemies. And then lastly, tank destroyers, which have the most powerful cannons in the game. And the reason why they have those is because they're meant for sniping. And so with that in mind, they have most of the time they have the best penetration, and they can really shoot tanks from across the map. They're really supposed to be there to support the other tanks. So being that sniper, positioning yourselves in ways where you have good view range of your enemies, in some cases staying within kind of a radius of your team and being able to have a good view of where your team is going may be able to be a good position for a tank destroyer. So enough of that. That basically is number one, just understanding the tank type. Number two is, I think one thing that would dramatically help players is if they just understood how to utilize and just know and understand their tank's gun depression. Typically, what gun depression means is it determines how far down your cannon can actually go. So if you have good gun depression, your cannon can go down quite far. If you don't have good gun depression, it can't go down very far. And so when you hear about tanks that have -10 degrees of gun depression, for example, that's good gun depression. That means your cannon can move down quite far. If it doesn't have good gun depression, that means it cannot go down very far. So typically tanks that have really good gun depression don't have the best armor on flat ground, but when you're putting yourselves on a position where you're a little bit behind a hill and you're using your cannon to point down when peeking over that hill, your turret is going to be the strongest, and that is the best way to utilize a tank with good gun depression, because tanks that don't have good gun depression are going to have not nearly as good of an advantage that you have, and you can get shots off them from different angles and sides that they're going to struggle with trying to get you if they play the same way. And so I see this a lot of times where players, because they don't have the good gun depression, they'll just come rolling over a hill just to get one shot off the bad guy that's bugging them and put themselves completely out in the open, entirely exposed, to exchange maybe not very much damage to one enemy, and in return they basically get deleted from the game. So if you don't have very good gun depression, typically tanks like that have a little bit better armor and are more likely to do better on flatter ground and utilizing hills more so in the way of going around the hills, not trying to go over or peek over them, and angle. So I won't go too much into that, but that's the second thing. And then the third thing is understand your tank. Understand the specs of it, the armor, just like not all heavy tanks are made equal. Not all medium tanks are made equal. Of course, Wargaming tries to do the best they can, so to say, with balancing and making sure that there's no tanks that are OP, even though we know there are some. But just understanding your strengths and weaknesses of your own tank will help you so much more with knowing how to position yourself on the battlefield. So hope this helps. This was just a way to help players more that had a 40 to 50% win rate. I guarantee if you implement these tactics in your gameplay, you will do a lot better. There is another video I did actually quite a while ago that has some other tips and tricks that I believe you can learn some stuff from. But yeah, so I would say a couple other things just outside of those top three that are very helpful to understand is knowing and utilizing consumables, having a fully trained tank, knowing how to use the different rounds such as AP rounds, APCR rounds, heat rounds. And now that I'm talking about this, I'm even thinking about making a part 2 to this video, because there are some very, very good technical things that would be extremely helpful to know for players at the 40 to 50% range before even getting to a video of or for players that have a 50 to 60% win rate. This is Stud Muffin 1986, and hope this video helps.